Hello, and welcome to the podcast that discusses all things gaming. Coming to you from the home of Indie PopCon, Gen Con, and the gaming capital of the world, we are the Established Facts.
I don't mind after a rough day coming home and wrangling with InDesign or writing or doing rules work or blogging. Yeah. Doing them all at once is a little rough, I will admit.
Yeah.
Starting to run out of hours in the day. But anyway.
That's something you really need, though. I mean, you have to have the passion for it.
You do. And it is not... I don't know that it was ever easy. These days, however, with the ability to crowdfund, which is a whole different kettle of fish, but with the ability to self-publish and the ability to crowdfund and the ability to get something relatively straightforwardly onto something like the DMs Guild, and with a lot of people putting stuff out there for free, and there are pros and cons of that. Like, for example, Kevin Crawford, when I was approaching people about advice, and I said, I'm going to do this, he's like, just don't. Just don't. You're a crazy fool, and you shouldn't do it. You should give your stuff away for a couple of years, build a fan base of quality responses, then maybe thinking about doing what you're doing. But you are a crazy fool to do what you're doing. Right. And he wasn't quite that blunt, but it was close. He wasn't wrong, right? Think about what I was contemplating doing a year and a half or 2 years ago. What grew eventually to 400,000 words, 3 volumes, each of which was going to be assumingly the same production value as the Wizards of the Coast stuff. Right. Yes, I have produced multiple copies of $6 million industrial etch depth vacuum equipment. That's my day job, and that's a complicated project. Nobody cares. Nobody knows, nobody cares about my project management skills until I demonstrate them by sending out the PDF and print copies early.
Yes.
Right? Yes. It is very much a show, don't tell, because we've all seen the stories of people who tell and don't show.
Yes.
So Kevin was not wrong to say, build a fan base and then go for money. And as the man who could probably kickstart an igloo in Alaska and get $100,000 for it, he knows of what he speaks. But there are other ways of doing it. But one has to look at what's worked, right? Look at Matt Colville's $2 million Kickstarter. As he just posted, he got that because almost everyone who listened to his very extensive streaming channel went and pledged. So he had a fan base. He had a mailing list. I think Kevin told me he had over 50,000 people on his mailing list. And the typical response rate for market research stuff is in the 3% range. Well, 3% of 50,000 is 1,500 backers. That's a ton of people.
That is, yes.
It's a ton of people. And 1,500 backers is enough to do almost everything, if you do it right.
Yeah.
In the gaming world, anyway. If I could guarantee 1,500 backers on my 3-volume Dragon Heresy set, I could publish it.
Oh yeah, easily.
I could publish it. I mean, because it would be $125 for 3 volume times 1,500 people. You're looking at a lot of money. You're looking at that's over $200,000. I could not only could I publish it all, I could start writing the next book and do that as and have money. I mean, that would be profit. Point is, though, you have to not count on that, and you have to learn how to write, and you have to learn how to do the stuff, or you have to find a network of people who can. And I can't remember. I've said this before, but the first thing you should do if you're contemplating doing this as an independent business, pick up your copy of your favorite high-end game book. Knights Black Agents, Dracula Dossier, Pathfinder Core Rules, Adventure Conqueror King, GURPS, D&D, of course. Go to the credits page Open the book to the credits page. Look at all the things someone paid to do.
Oh yeah.
Look at all the things someone paid to do I'm going to just grab director's handbook for. Right?
I've got the miniatures handbook, which is actually one of my.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Dracula Dossier. We have a publisher. We have several authors. We have a whole bunch of contributors who did other stuff. Oh, I know that guy. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different cartographers to do maps, 2 art directors, a whole paragraph of people doing interior art, a bunch of playtesters, and then like 3 pages of backers. That's actually pretty light because I don't see marketing on here. I don't see that much layout. There are things that are happening to make this book that are not in the credits.
Oh yeah, and,
Unless you can
it's like it's like looking at a movie from the 80s versus looking at a movie from now.
Yeah.
Look at the credits, the difference in credits from those 2 eras.
But my point about that, though, is that every one of those jobs is there because it needs to be done.
Yes. And if you're an independent person, you're
get
doing it all.
That's exactly right. Now, that doesn't mean, and here's the kicker, that doesn't mean you have to do it yourself. But it does mean that you're going to need to either find someone who's willing to do quid pro quo. Oh, I'm a good writer. You're a good layout guy. I'll write for your book if you will help me lay out mine. At least you're trading value.
Yes.
But you can't eat exposure, but you can die from it. So I'm a big believer. Gaming Ballistic, in its history as a company, I think there's 1 or 2 people who have done volunteer work for me, and that's mostly because I just haven't paid them yet. But I've paid everyone who's worked for me.
That's impressive.
And I try not to let people, let me do this. No. If you do this, we will do it under contract so that you have expectations of what you're doing, and I have expectations of what we're getting. I've broken that rule a couple times recently because my relationships with some of my artists are such that I can say, hey, I need a drawing that looks kind of like this. Here's my art direction. Here's my sketch. And when I say sketch, I mean stick figures of what I want. Here's a small folder on Google Drive of all of my reference images because there are certain things I insist on getting right. But the one thing that I basically do is I say, okay, blah, 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 this is what I want. He's like, okay, let me get to work. And then I'm like, no. You do not put pen to paper until I pay you your 20% advance.
That's
so
smart.
even if we're doing it word of mouth, no contract, we'll come to an agreement on a fee. And basically, and even my contracts, I had a lawyer draw up a contract, and I have an English version of it that I send to my people. But I basically say, this contract is not binding until you get money from me. And there's a step in the contract that I say, this is not binding. Even if we both sign it, until I mail you dollars, it doesn't count. Like anteing up. And that's how I work, but you don't have to work that way. But I'm a big believer in paying for value, and it's part of one of the problems is the wrong word. One of the peculiarities of this particular industry is there's so much fan material out there. Some of it is very, very good. That asking someone to pay for material sometimes seems like, really? Because the assumption is, well, I can just do that. And yeah, almost anybody can just run a game. Not everyone can put a book together.
No.
But almost everybody can run some sort of game if they want to. And taking that step to say, not only am I going to do this, not only am I going to do it and publish it, but I'm going to do it, ask for money, and expect to be paid, requires a leap of faith on your part, and a bit of a willingness to stick to your guns. No, I'm gonna find. Actually, what I wound up doing, because I'm a mathy dork, is I took my whole shelf full of books with a cover price, and I plotted a regression of page count versus price.
Right.
in order to figure out what my price point needed to be, and I had different curves for hardback versus softback and
Oh my goodness,
black and
dude.
white versus. Hey, but the thing is, and it was funny because I did all this work and I came up with actually a fairly simple formula for pricing, and then I was at Gen Con, and I was sitting down in the middle of the floor in the cafeteria there or whatever, eating and sitting, talking to somebody. And he's talking to me, and I'm talking about dungeon grappling, and I was like, oh yeah, and I came up with this formula, and blah blah blah. And then I'm not sure what it is, but that's what it is. And he's like, oh, I work in the publishing industry, and that's exactly the formula.
Wow, that's amazing.
So he's like, that's exactly right. He's like, yeah, that's exactly the ballpark that we use, and then you adjust it based on market expectations. But this is roughly the trend that you should expect to see. And so that made me feel good.
Well, yeah, I mean, you figured out their formula, which is great. But getting back to your earlier point about paying people, that is actually extremely important, because I've come into the publishing sort of accidentally.
Sure.
And so I've made a lot of the mistakes of, hey, I enjoy gaming, let me write for you, and I'll do this pro bono, and it never works. Volunteer work never works for this sort of thing, because people get busy and they're like, well, this is like on the lowest level of my importance scale. So
right.
Things get sidelined, and actually the project I initially started out for publishing got completely sidelined because of this problem. So if you're going to do self-publishing, be prepared to have your primary job fund this.
Yes. Absolutely. Or find something else that does.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the, I don't entirely, but and publishing is a tough way to be, because it's a lot. I work in the hard disk drive industry, and it's storage is so important, and we put our whole lives on disk drives and digital products, and yet we are unwilling to shell out for the technology that's in a disk drive. That's not a poor little me story. That's what happens when your work is commoditized. Mm-hmm. And role-playing games are commodity.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone thinks they can do them.
Yeah. Some
people are right, and some people aren't, but it's all part of the same mishmash. And the getting paid and understanding what your rights are as a writer and getting it in writing, mm-hmm. And understanding that, hey, I could do 50,000 words worth of work and never have it see the light of day, and I could never get paid for that if it's pay on publication. So you really need to, and then as a business person, you need to decide how you're going to go about what you do in terms of what things that you're going to force yourself to learn, what things you're going to outsource, and what things that you are going to just naturally be able to do. Or some things you're just simply not going to do. You may say, you know what, I have absolutely no interest whatsoever in learning the ins and outs of print and print buying and print on demand and offset printing and case wrapping and Smith sewing and whatever. I don't care. I'm going to publish PDFs. And I'm not going to have my own storefront. I'm going to throw them up on drive-thru, or I'm going to go to Steve Jackson Games' Warehouse 23 or DM's Guild or something like that.
And that's totally legit.
It's absolutely legit. I'm not disparaging it. I'm just saying, when I did Gaming Ballistic, for whatever godforsaken reason, I decided I really wanted to see my work as 3 full-color hardcover volumes. That was probably biting off too much, but you know what? In another 6 to 8 weeks, I'm going to be looking at 1 hardcover full color volume, because even if the public doesn't want them, I'll buy some for me.
Exactly. and that's the thing. I mean, you're looking, when you first start that project, you're looking at something that is very daunting, and it's something that you're like, this will never work. There's too much work. There's too many pitfalls. But you have got to bare your teeth, close your eyes, and just barrel through. Because if you keep doubting yourself, then it will not happen.
Right. And there will be enough pitfalls along the way that, I mean, the doubts are not only going to come, they're going to be real.
Oh, yeah.
It's and here's a story, right? Here's a story. Dungeon grappling. Everyone hates grappling rules. Mm-hmm. So I figured it was going to be pretty weak in the market. I expected that. I had certain goals. I had certain work that I did ahead of time. I had certain work that I paid for ahead of time. All of the art, I had no idea if people were going to do this. So I had a fairly low funding goal, and most of my stretch goals were art, more art, even more art. Hey, look, more art. And that's how it worked out. And I got even more art than I wanted because it did a little bit better than I thought. But my goal was like $1,500, and I wound up raising, when all came to it, about $5,000. And that was enough to fully fund publishing the book and getting the Kickstarter out. And then I bought $400 worth of inventory for Dungeon Grappling. Which was, however many copies, maybe it was 50 or whatever. I think it was, 25, 50 copies. So I bought some for me so that I could sell them through my website. So I started off at about a minus $400 loss on Dungeon Grappling. That's if you don't include all the money I paid to Adobe Creative Cloud.
Oh, yes.
And
that is a monthly...
It is a monthly thing. And that's the thing is, if I don't sell 4 or 5 or 6 copies a month of something, I don't
You're in
pay.
A loss.
I'm running at a loss. Anyway, point is, second thing that I'm doing, Lost Hall of Tyr, I'm like, it's 5th edition. 5th edition is awesome. It's a huge market. It's an adventure. People like adventures. I'll come back to that one. It's an adventure. People like adventures. It's 5th edition. The market should be big. I delivered PDF a month early. I delivered print 3 months early, which you don't hear much in Kickstarter.
No.
I'm proud of that.
Yeah, you should be.
Yeah, right. And so, even the Australians got their copies ahead of schedule. Actually in the second Kickstarter that I ran, one of my New Zealander guys got it before almost everybody in America for odd reasons. I can talk about that later, but the how to move books around the world is an interesting topic in and of itself.
Oh, yeah.
Point is, I was like, okay, I contracted with Roland Warzeka, who's the Dimicator guy. He's one of the best sword and buckler fighters in the world. He's also a super top-notch, super expensive graphic illustrator. Mm-hmm. Great artist. He has 30 or 40,000 Facebook followers. And I'm like, in my experience, people who like to play with swords and people who like to play games about swords overlap pretty well. So if I throw money,
right.
a bunch of money,
yeah.
I don't feel like I can reveal the contract details.
No.
That was really more for everyone else's benefit. I know you get that.
Yeah.
And that's just one step back. Your business relations with your other contractors and vendors are private. And it is important to maintain the privacy of the business relationships and who you're working with and who you're working for and all that stuff up until the point where you mutually agree that you can disclose it.
Agreed.
Frequently in the credits, you'll say, as part of my contract, I will put you in the credits because you deserve it. And by and large, that's something that people want to do. But you shouldn't be telling people what you paid other contractors. That's part of the confidentiality thing. That's just a public service announcement. But I do disclose all of my financial details because they're mine, and I want people to see what it is to run a gaming business and what it is to lose $20,000 in a year, which is what happened in 2017 to me, running this gaming business. And I published that on my blog, gamingballistic.com.
I remember that one.
It was a good year, but I lost $20,000. So what's the best way to make a small fortune in the role-playing game design business? Start with a large one. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I contract with this artist, and it's a great piece of art, and he publishes it on that he's working with it on his Facebook page, and I get 5,000 visitors in one day to one of my blog posts. I'm like, yes, this is the market I'm tapping, and these guys are going to come to me. And I spent all the money in advance.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm like, I've got this. How could I get
How could this fail?
How could I get fewer backers than Dungeon Grappling? It's grappling, for God's sakes.
Yes.
Right. I mean, not only will people avoid a grappling Kickstarter, they'll not back a second Kickstarter just to spite the grappling one. It's not even related. I'm going to not back a travel book because this guy's trying to publish a grappling book. That's how much we hate grappling.
Yes, exactly.
So I figured a 5th edition adventure would get at least 500 backers, easy. So my threshold for the minimum I was expecting to raise was $7,500, and I was like, 15,000, well within range, no problem, because I got 241 backers. And so I brought in about $4,000. I brought in another 30. Okay, so one thing about that though is that the backer kit phase.
Right. Oh, yes.
Because there are things that you do after the Kickstarter. Yes. One piece of advice that is becoming more common these days is collecting shipping in backer kit because the fees are lower.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Right, and so if you collect it in Kickstarter, you pay the full Kickstarter fees. If you collect in backer kit, you pay the lower backer kit fees, and that can be as low as a flat 3%, depending on the payment tier that you do. So you can lose a lot less by moving the shipping offline. And so my net take was about $5,300 for a book that I spent probably close to $6,500 on. So I was down $1,000, and it hasn't been moving, probably because it's a linear convention demonstration adventure, and. So that's the thing, is that you really need to know your market. One thing that's interesting about adventures is I would say that conservatively the market is 1/4 to 1/5 what a core book would be, because everyone needs the rules, but only one person needs the adventure.
Yes, exactly.
Only
the GM needs it, and
right.
So you've lost 6 people there.
Yeah. So, and that's why I think that things like Glyn Seal's Midderlands, which is a setting, not an adventure. So everyone needs to understand and can enjoy the setting. Now, Glyn did great work. So, there's only so much you can contain awesome. Right. But, where I think that settings and sandboxes tend to do better than adventures, because only one person needs an adventure. And if the adventure doesn't fit, you're done. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to go questing for the Lost Hall of Tyr, there's nothing else you can do with it. There's a million things you can do in the Midderlands. And he's written about none of them. It's all seeds for you to do cool stuff. So everyone can take inspiration from that. So I think that supplements like the how do you go get strongholds and followers, right? I didn't care about his streaming show, and I haven't seen it. My understanding is it's very, very good, but I was interested in the rules themselves. A lot of other people just want to support him, and they love his streaming, and they want the book, and so it was this colossal thing that raised $2 million. But you can't plan on bottling lightning that way.
No. I mean, that stuff happens.
And it is. However, I will say this: you can just as easily be crushed by success as by failure in this business.
Yes, that is also important to understand. I mean, if you are like, I raised $2 million and I only wanted $1,500, you could get screwed. You
could be in a lot of trouble. And for Matt, I didn't see anything in the Kickstarter pitch that made me worry. No, I take that back. That's not true. He has a lot of miniatures that he's moving,
and production of them.
And that is, I have full faith that he's going to be able to do it. But I backed it anyway. But that's one of my red flags: is are you trying to do something where you're delivering physical product? He says as he's offering shields.
Yeah, well, you're limiting it too. So,
but I'm limiting it. I'm limiting it to a certain number. I could raise that number. I won't raise it past about 150 because if someone really wants one of those shields, they can buy it through my website. But the thing is about and I want to say the was it Palladium, the Kickstarter that really had problems because of miniatures. Robotech, maybe? I can't remember. But there was something that came out where they basically explained what happened, and they tried to get into it. And I'm in a job where I have to be associated with, and I haven't done this myself, but I've had coworkers that have, with injection molding for precision tooling and trays to hold disk drive parts. Inevitably, we go through thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars of rework because it just doesn't mold right. So if you're doing that sort of thing and you don't realize how many iterations it can take to get it right, you can find yourself spending 3 times as much money as you thought. And if you haven't budgeted for it in your development cost and therefore your funding goal, you're on the hook to deliver that product.
Oh, yeah.
And you can't pass that cost under the Kickstarter terms on to your backers. Oh, the cost went up, so I have to charge you more. I'm sorry. That's your problem now. So if you are going to offer a physical product, you need to understand all the steps in developing it, procuring it, transporting it, getting returns when somebody's pet tiger decides that it's a chew toy.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I want my book. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not responsible for tigers. Oh, well, you're a bad customer service guy. Dude, tiger! Sorry, I paid for a book. I don't have my book. Is it my fault that the cat was just being a cat?
Oh, yes, yes. It's
Well, and
tiger.
And the tiger. And the right way to do that is, I will of course send you your book.
Yep.
Let me help you with that. And you see, Steve Jackson Games had a real tough time with their Ogre Kickstarter. It was hugely successful. Too many stretch goals. I think they're still delivering them because they were a victim of their own success, and they've gotten better at limiting the scope of what they do. Even so, if you read the report to the stakeholders for the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game, they're not doing a reprint. The project was a success. The surgery was a success, but the patient died. Because, and here's something that everyone needs to understand, and I'm sorry if that sounds really pretentious, but it was a blow to me and a surprise to me. The demand curve for role-playing games and board games today, as Andrew Hackard described it on the Steve Jackson Games forums, the sales curve looks like Half Dome at Yosemite. It goes up, it flattens off, and then it dies because there are so many games coming out every month that if your model is distribution, if you are going into game stores, expect to make your money in a month or not at all.
Yep.
Do not assume you may get one. And Wizard of the Coast, bless their hearts, I mean that in the most nice Texas way. Wizard of the Coast, bless their hearts, bust the stupid model, 4 years and increasing sales and whatever. Almost everybody else, you can't count on. You used to say, oh, I'm going to do this, so I'm going to have a long tail. The long tail doesn't tail much for most games. Some people bottle awesome, and they just keep selling. And I know that Alex Macris's Adventure Conqueror King has been given new life a few times in some, I can't remember if he did a bundle of holding or whatever. And the reason I pick on this one is because I'm staring at it. It's a great book. It's a nice variation on D&D, old school D&D. It's kind of what I wanted to do.
Right.
Right. Coming back to the Dragon Heresy thing, let's take something with different rules, but it's still a familiar system. His production values are ridiculous. They're awesome, right? This book, I don't know if you own it.
I don't.
The cover is gorgeous. It's a matte. It's wonderful. It's heavy. I think he printed it on 105-pound paper, which is I think 150 GSM if you're a metric guy. So it's a black and white interior. The layout is nothing special. interior, right? It's a very old school layout. It uses a lot of silhouette art. But it is a wonderful book to hold. It makes me want to lick it. Right? It's
okay,
just,
well, that's a new one.
Yeah,
If your book is good enough to lick, then it's great.
Yeah. But it's just a great production value, and he's not Wizards of the Coast. You can build a great book. Glenn built a great book. Jason Peter builds great books. If you've seen his SIG, it's amazing to look at and feel. I don't know how he managed to pack such great production values into this small package. It can be done, but you really need to know what you're doing in order to do it.
Yeah, and honestly, I've pretty much given up on distribution. I'm looking at conventions and selling direct to the people. It's just.
Yep. And if you don't know, I mean, the thing, and that's one of the places where you can look at it. You say, well, how could you possibly lose money on Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game? Well, the cover price, the Kickstarter price was $50. The cover price for the box set is $60. So you sell it, you get $50-$60, right? Mm-hmm. Wrong. Mm-hmm. You get 40%, maybe 50%, but by and large, you're looking at 40% of your sale price. And in order to sell into distribution and pay for the reprint, because you never, ever want to say, oh, look, my costs were $10. I sold it for $18, and so look, I made an 80% profit. You're going to lose money.
Yep. Because
you can't reprint it based on your profits, even if you lose $2 on the reprint. So it's not evergreen. No. Right? So you need to, if you're looking at your cost of materials and what it takes to make it, you want to make sure that when you sell it, whatever channels you're selling it into, whatever the one you're going to put most of your product into, you have to more than double the cost into that venue. So normally what I've heard is you want to be kicking around 20 to 25% of the retail price of your game as all in, including burden and overhead, and if you're going to pay for Adobe and all in, you want to be lower than a quarter, because you're going to lose most of that going into distribution if that's your model, and then you're going to, if you do manage to bottle lightning, you could go out of business fulfilling demand.
Oh yeah. Yes, I mean. The cost for the upfront cost, I mean, yes, price per individual unit goes down, but the cost goes up.
Yep.
Dramatically.
That's right. And now the flip side, though, is if you do manage, so let's say, and here's a great example. Let me pull it off the shelf because I happen to have one. Dragon Heresy, printing quote. 256-page book. Let's go soft cover, black and white. No, it's not, actually. Let's do color.
Oh, yeah.
Where's my color part? And the reason is because black and white digital printing, offsets or print on demand is remarkably competitive well into the large volumes. It's surprisingly competitive with offset print. You get into color and all bets are off.
Oh, yeah.
Right, but especially you can actually look at the cost of the stuff on Drive-Thru RPG. There's a calculator and it gives you the formula. And when I do my budgeting spreadsheet, I literally put the formula for the book that I hope to produce in there, so that as the page I have how many words is it and what's the layout words per page and what's my percentage of art per page, and it does the math and it says this is how many pages your book is going to be. Therefore, this is going to be what it costs to print. And if you're not comfortable with that level of budget detail, find someone who is. If you do, marry them because you're going to need it. Mm-hmm. If you're already married, I don't know, move to Utah. But okay, here we go. So, good example. 500 copies, hardcover, full cover. Looking at about $15. Go to 1,000 copies, it's $10. A great website to do, and then if I were to go to 9,000 copies, it's probably $5 or $6. So I could go, if I'd managed to bottle lightning, mm-hmm. and I get 10,000 orders. Oh my God, everybody wants one of these things. Uh-huh. I could go from a situation where my cost of materials will support one and done on the Kickstarter to a situation where, because my print runs are large, I could drop the cost of materials to the point where it becomes affordable to go into distribution. However, at some point that demand is going to drop off, and you have to be watching ahead. Now, unfortunately, I don't have enough sales to actually do a projection yet of anything, right? If you sell 500 or 600 copies of something, I kind of get the feeling in an indie game you're doing well.
Yes, certainly.
And Dungeon Grappling has done that, by the way. Dungeon Grappling has sold, I don't know, 600, 650.
That's really good. That's super good.
It's done better than my GURPS technical grappling book, which has distribution and has the mass of a company behind it. So I'm proud of that game, and it is actually in the black on a project basis. Overall, Gaming Ballistic is not, because I've spent so much money on Adobe InDesign over 2 years and Dragon Heresy to get to where I am. But the point is that it is possible to have a bottled lightning to the point where your costs get lowered. But boy, if that's what you're counting on, that is
you're going to fail.
It's publishing Russian roulette. Eventually, you're gonna miss.
Yeah.
But again, you don't have to do that. You can go. Many people are perfectly happy with the PDF, and those that are not, you can just put it up on print on demand, and the books that you get out of drive-through or other places are not bad.
They aren't.
They're not bad.
It's just crazy people like us that were like, I'm an independent developer. I'm going to do this, and I want physical copies.
Right. Well, and so here's an interesting thing. People will say, well, like, for example, when I do my Kickstarter, like the retail price of the Dragon Heresy is probably going to be about $40. The PDF is going to be $20 because I believe what Fred Hicks says about pricing, and the bundle is $50, half the price of the PDF plus the print. And you get to say, well, why are you making people pay for content twice? I was like, I'm not, because print has different value proposition than PDF. Print is, if you look at the physiological studies of how people read books and how people assimilate information, the tangibility, the way that you read stuff, it is actually easier to read and assimilate information on a printed page or a Kindle e-ink than a backlit screen.
Yes.
You learn worse, you get more tired, and it's harder to retain the information as a general population. Individual mileage may vary. But as a general population, you will get more out of a book by reading the physical copy.
I completely concur with this. When I went through my second master's, I did a lot of ebooks, and it was torture trying to read them. Right.
However, I can't search. I have to rely on an index. By the way, pay for the index. $4 a page, but it's worth it.
Yes.
But with a PDF, you can search it. You can bundle them together. You can take an entire gaming library with you in your pocket. The value proposition of the two is different. Some companies, Steve Jackson Games being one of them, and there are others, price their PDFs at something like 70% of the physical book cost. So if you sell a $50 physical book, the PDF will be $35.
Wow.
And so there are people who are, and another reason for that, and most people, I didn't appreciate this until I did it myself. To make a PDF or to make a print copy, the development cost to make PDF versus print is identical. It is identical. The sunk costs are the same. The only difference between PDF and print is how you export it, the resolution required, pretty much. And the PDF, of course, you're going to want to sit down and bookmark it and hyperlink it and all that stuff. So there's a little bit of extra work there. But I didn't know this until I did it. I didn't realize that the way that you get something printed is you mail a ginormous PDF file to the printer.
Oh, yeah.
I had no idea. And I think that based on the commentary that I see all the time on like the Steve Jackson Games forums or whatever, people I think that print is harder, PDF is easier, and electrons are free, so your PDF should be free. But when I look at it, for me, if I'm to do everything with the production values that I'm trying to throw into the Dragon Heresy book, it's actually if you gross it up for the money that you lose in Kickstarter, it's like $165 a page. When you look at editing, art direction, project management.
The first thing that comes is the PDF. So everything that you put into it.
First thing that comes is the PDF. So if I were to do an overall budget for a 3-book set the size of 5th edition, 3 solid full color books, and I know what they pay their artists because I can't afford them. I've priced those guys out. They'll charge between $1,000 and $3,000 or $4,000 per full page of color art, and mostly deserve it.
Oh, yeah.
I say mostly because there are people who will charge $200, $300, $400, $500, $600 per full page who are every bit as good. But art is subjective. Art is very subjective. So, there are people who are out there who
entire podcast and dealing with artists. So
yeah. So anyway, so point is on that one is if I were to do an 800-page book, it's going to cost $120,000, whether it's PDF or print. If I want 1,000 copies of each, small print run relative to D&D, big for most indie guys, that's $30,000 additional. So total spend is $150K. $120K of that, 75%, is getting to the PDF stage.
Yep. So
from that math, which is roughly 75% of the total, you could see where you'd say, yeah, this is what I pay to develop the PDF, 70% of the print volume. There's a proportionality there that I'm going to do. Now, caveat, the customer doesn't buy that crap.
No, not at all.
The customer doesn't buy that crap even a tiny bit, especially when I can go to some streaming site and steal it for free, which I don't. And I don't recommend it. But the point is that because the PDFs are so readily available, they are valued less. Even though objectively there's so much extra utility in that digital copy, I think objectively they should be worth more, but they're not, and that the market is not going to change that.
No.
So the point of that is that people speak harshly of too high PDF prices, and I think Fred was right, where if you're only charging like a quarter of your physical print, you're suspected of, you're probably not, it's considered maybe, I'm not going to get the PDF because the publisher doesn't value it, so why should I? If you're charging 75%, people think you're on drugs. That 50% seems to,
it works out.
I've never other than a couple of people who I think have unrealistic expectations of what they expect to get in terms of price per page. Most people seem to be happy with the 50% split, and I'll give if you want both, I do drop it down to basically 25% of the overall physical cost. So
that's cool. I mean, so we're about out of time now. Let's get some information about you out there.
Sure.
The Kickstarter is launching April 2nd. April 2nd, and it's called Dragon Heresy.
The Dragon Heresy introductory set.
Okay, and your website?
GamingBallistic.com.
We'll put links in the show notes so people can get to them and find you. And let's see here. Are you going to be at any conventions coming up?
Like we said, I'm going to really try and get to the one in Iceland just because it's awesome. I'm going to try and go to some of the local Minneapolis conventions because that's basically where I live. I'm going to try and get to, I think, GameholeCon in Madison.
Okay.
And I'm going to try and start hitting some of the smaller conventions. My Gen Con experience was a little rough in terms of money spent versus presence value derived from it. I sold like 10 copies of Dungeon Grappling, and it cost me $3,000 to get there and stay there and do whatever. So that's Gen Con, right?
Yeah.
But part of it is that, I'm a mainstream system guy. I'm not making my own system yet. I'm varying it and stuff. But the vector that I was publishing through is not as it's an indie, right? If you want to go do Wizards of the Coast stuff, there's lots of venues for that. If you don't, you come to the booth that I was at.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And there was one guy, literally one customer who came through, looked at Dungeon Grappling, and was like, "5th edition? Why the fuck would anyone play?" I'm sorry, 5th edition. Why would anyone want to play D&D? And he almost literally dropped it on the floor. I think he was trying to be respectful to the other booth people, so he put it back.
Right.
But you could tell by his body language, he literally wanted to throw it over his shoulder and spit on it, because that's not why he was in that store.
Exactly.
He wasn't there for mainstream games. If he wanted that, he would have gone to the Paizo guys or whatever.
Yes.
So you really need to make sure. But if you go to North Texas RPG Con or Gamehole Con or Gary Con,
oh yeah,
right. So I need to more strategically plan out my convention attendance and the games that I want to run. But the grappling book and the Lost Olive Tier, we're not terribly well suited to. I'm going to show up and make an explosion of buzz. Dragon Heresy is. That's a game that you can play, that you can sell it, you can talk to your friends about it. It's got cool mythology and you can learn stuff, and it's got some different rules that you may love, you may hate, but you can do something with them. And it's going to be a pretty book. You've seen it, but take my word for it. It's a pretty book. Go to my blog, you'll see it. And so there's a, and now I'll have 3, so I'll be able to show up and have a portfolio. And if a couple other things happen and I keep my fingers writing, I'll have some adventures or some mini settings or locations to go along with it. So by the time I show up at the end of the year, I could have 3, 4, 5, 6 products from Gaming Ballistic that people could spend money on. And the interesting thing about that, and this gets back to the original topic of getting into the business, some people are completionists.
Mm-hmm.
And I expect that when I have 3, 4, 5, or 6 products out there, all of a sudden someone is going to discover that Lost Hall of Tyr is the greatest thing since sliced bread.
And they're going
to want it because they want everything.
Yep.
It may be just the one guy, probably from New Zealand.
Right.
But right, it may just be that one guy. But I've heard about this in fiction authorship too. Once you have, I think it's like a half a dozen books, all of a sudden your back catalog starts getting traction again. And
that's something that I learned when I was vending at conventions. Is there was a vendor who's been at multiple conventions, and he came up to me. It was my first vending at a convention. He said, "I see you got a product out there. What you need to do is you need to have a variety of products out there to vend." And what you're doing with your catalog and what your new products that you're doing is you're building that product base. So when someone comes up to your table and says, "Hey, look, I see that you've got that system. Oh, this also goes with it, and that goes with it. I'm going to get all 3."
Right. And I definitely get the feeling. And here's the lightning in the bottle thing again, right? You definitely get the feeling that people are going to go, and sometimes they break the rules. Like, I didn't really have a limit on what I was going to do at Gen Con. I came back with almost too many books for my luggage to carry.
Mm-hmm.
Because I picked up Symbaroum because it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, and they did layout things in Symbaroum that I'd never seen done before.
That's a danger of Gen Con.
Right. But the thing is that people are going to come with a certain amount of money in their head that they're going to spend.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're like, "Oh, Dragon Heresy, I love it. I want it. Oh, Dungeon Grappling can bring this system to 5th edition. Give me that too. Oh, Lost Hall of Tyr is set in Terra. I don't know anything about Tyr, and I read this bad review of it, but I want it anyway because, yay, it all goes together." And they'll walk out with, they'll walk out with $85 of your product. And because of the excitement of the moment, but if it's just the one book, especially it's just like, oh, it's a grappling book, yeah, whatever. Yeah, it's got a cool snake babe on the front, and that's got some good nostalgia value. But beyond that, what's going on? So there is a certain amount of persistence that you have to have, and you really want to plan for going to the well a couple of times before the momentum carries you forward. And that fundamentally was what Kevin was trying to get at with the give it away for free for a while. Once you have a fan base, life gets easier. You can crush your fan base. You can destroy it. You can have you can destroy it through bad will. But once you have a fan base, as long as you continue to serve that fan base, you can do well for yourself. I don't know if you're going to do $100,000 a year well for yourself. But it is legitimately possible to do so.
Yes.
If you have a 3-volume set that sells for $50 a piece, like the D&D books do, it's $150 in revenue. If you are selling direct from your website or something like it, all of that revenue is yours. And the cost of that book, of those 3 books, can be anywhere between $20 and $50 depending on the size of your print run. So you can legitimately make $100 a set on a Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, DM Guide type. Sorry, yeah, that's right, DM
That's
Guide
it. You got it.
type of thing. You can make $100 a set, and you quote unquote only need to sell 1,000 a year to bring in $100,000, which then of course you're an independent business, so you lose 50% to taxes. But you can have a substantial income with a relatively small sales rate.
Yes.
And if you have 5 products like that, and this is where the difference between system and setting comes in. If you have a system with multiple settings, where it's, here's a rule set, and here's the one tweaked for fantasy, here's the one tweaked for sci-fi, here's the one tweaked for cyberpunk, here's the one tweaked for your political cause of choice, left wing, right wing, write both and let the books fight. Right? So you have 5 or 6 different settings that are deriving from the same common rule base, so you don't have to reteach yourself the game. You can legitimately have people coming in and out of that, and 500 or 600 sales a year times 5 products turns into 3,000 sales a year, which turns into $300,000. And that's legitimately something where, yeah, that's your day job now. It's not necessarily, buy a building.
No, but you can live off of it easily.
But you can absolutely live off of it. But that's the one. The buy a building was a certain thing. I do want to point out that one of the things about going into your own business is do as much as possible from your desk at home until you can't, because as soon as you have employees, as soon as you have overhead, life gets really, really, really hard
and complicated. And
it's not just complicated on your tax forms. It is a lot harder to make. Look at the stories people tell from the mainstream industry that isn't D&D, because D&D is like magic, right? It's 8 or 9 of every $10 spent in the gaming market is D&D related in the role playing game market. It's just, maybe I'm a little high, but not much. As far as I can tell, because a lot of the Kickstarters that are successful are D&D based too. So you look at Matt's Kickstarter, that's unmistakably related to D&D 5th edition. Point is that if you listen to him talk, right? So if it costs me as an independent developer $150 a page, it probably costs a company with a building and a staff and whatever $300 a page, if not more, because of all the overhead. So it's
you got to know what your realistic size is, and do as much as you can. It's really make it slim. you're going to be doing a lot on your own.
Yeah. And the biggest piece of advice, just to close it out, biggest piece of advice that I'd walk away with, and what I did, and it's worked for me, and I think it will continue will, look at your 5 favorite games that you want to emulate. Go to the credits page, write down every job description, and put that in your spreadsheet as something that has to be done. On any given project, you may decide that you're not going to do X today. I'm going to do art direction myself. However, you need to account for the value. That's 20% of the total art budget of the entire thing. That is value you're creating by acting as your own art director, and you should write that down, but then your budget for it is 0 because you're doing it yourself. It's sweat equity. But make no mistake, you're providing value. And at some point, if you're going to turn this into a day job, you need to turn that sweat equity into actual equity.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. You need to get paid at some point.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I just want to throw that out there. You are creating fun and enjoyment and entertainment and pleasure for people. And if a movie actor or a sports guy or a newscaster or a software programmer who writes games or writes music can get big money because they're creating pleasure, you can too. What you do with that after you get it, if you want to give it all away, fine, but then it's your choice.
And with that, I think that's an excellent place to end on. Doug, this has been incredible.
And you got me going. I had a long week, and I wanted to. Hopefully you can, and feel free. I don't expect every word that we've said to make it because I talk a lot and I talk fast, but. Feel free to edit, but I had a great time. I love talking about this stuff. Clearly, I could have talked about this for another 3 hours.
Oh, yeah. You and I both. But, we're sort of neck deep in the behind-the-scenes things. So it's like, I know this and this and this. And understand that? Oh, I understand this. Let's share ideas and stuff like that. We could totally do that. But unfortunately, with the podcast and our listeners who are probably like, what just hit me right now? Well, this has definitely been a very special episode of The Established Facts. I really want to thank Doug for coming on and sharing all of his knowledge, all of his history, and his Kickstarter. Please go and support it. I've had a look at it. I've had an early look. Very privileged to have an early look at it, and it looks fantastic. I wholeheartedly support it, and I will be looking to pledge my support to the Kickstarter. So head on out there, and we will see you guys for hopefully a regular episode next time. If not, it'll be a HoosierCon episode, so who knows? I don't. But I hope you guys having wonderful, wonderful games, and we'll talk to you later. See ya.
Please visit us at www.theestablishedfacts.com and our Facebook page, facebook.com/theestablishedfacts. If you would like to support us by buying some merchandise, visit catholipress.com/castingrobot.
Bonus